All right, guys, let's get right to it. This episode was a lot of fun to put together, actually. Doing the research for it, kind of putting the notes together. And like I said, I'm still finding my feet here on this particular topic. So we're still in the awkward phases, but I think that there's a lot of good information in this, and I'm really excited to get into it. So today's episode is on Jesus walking on water. So there's a lot of symbolism here, and obviously it's a miracle and it's its own thing that like it's very cool that it happened, and it's very interesting. It's a good example of God's power, and but you got to remember that Jesus on Earth was the biggest event of history, at least since the fall. Like everything that happened happened for a reason. There wasn't anything that happened just because, oh, this might be interesting. This is a good display of power. There's the miracles, they have symbolic value to them. They're also metaphors. They're things that we can unravel, things that we can dig into and peel layers back on. The same way the parables are. We can talk, you can spend forever talking about the parables and getting into them. And there's the basic like external view of like this is the good moral that we're teaching with this story, and then there's so many there's a lot of depth to it that you can get in, and this story is no different. So let's break it down. The first thing is that he was preaching, he was teaching to the crowds, and then he sent the disciples out onto the lake and said, "All right, you guys go out here. I'm going to send the crowds away. I'll meet you over there." So that's the first thing. The first thing is that he takes the time to send them away, while he gets rid of the crowds, right? Um, this shows that the storms that arise, first of all, are not always seen by the world. So the storms that we because the storm rose up when he walked on water. The storms that come our way, there are sometimes, I think it's usually pointed out that like stuff is going to happen to us, but I think that the deeper meaning to this is that the stuff happens inside of us. It happens as a part of us. It is us. The storms are the mental and emotional storms that we deal with every single day. And so a lot of times those storms are not seen by people. They're not, and not only the storms are not seen by the world, but the spiritual revelation that can come out of that is also not seen by the world. This is something that you have to do on your own. You have to be willing to go out on your own. You have to be willing to get away from the world, away from all the external stuff, away from the crowds, so to speak. You have to be willing to go out on your own. And of course, Jesus sent them out there knowing that the storm's going to come up. So he said, like, you're going to deal with this stuff. If you look at it as mental, emotional storms, this is really a way of him saying, you've got to go face your problem. Like it's not about I'm going to go sit in my room and pray. It's about I'm going to actually face the stuff that's going on inside of me. I'm going to actually confront my demons. I'm going to deal with the stuff that I don't want to see, all the stuff that I'm trying to hide from. So you got to remember the unconscious mind, the body, does not know the difference between thoughts and reality. Um, and if you don't believe that, take a minute and think about somebody that you really don't like and see how angry you get and see how you start to have a physical reaction to that. Think about somebody that you love and see how you do feel that, right? Think about a stressful situation, something that really freaks you out, and then start to see how your body responds to it. The body doesn't know that this is in your mind, it's reacting to it. And so the same thing with this, when when we understand that, it becomes easy to see that the thoughts that we allow in our heads can very easily create prisons for ourselves. They can create these very stressful environments where the thoughts that are coming up are having a very profound impact on our body, on our emotional state. And I don't think that that's news to anybody. Like we all know that we torture ourselves with the thoughts that we have. But that's what's being symbolized here. The winds that kick up, because it says that the winds kicked up the waves. The wind is the thoughts. The waves of the emotional body. The waves are the emotional reactions that we have to these thoughts. So when the winds start to kick things up, that's analogous to I start allowing negative thoughts into my mind. I start allowing myself to react to these things. The body doesn't know that this is not real. It doesn't know that this is just me, stressing out, thinking about stuff. I start to respond to it. So I start to get worked up emotionally. I start to become fearful. I start to become angry. I start to become anxious. I get into these negative states. And it's not a simple matter of, I don't like, I'm kind of bummed out. I have maybe not the best outlook on life right now, but like we can really get ourselves worked up, right? And it doesn't take much. And I think that we all kind of know that we have these very strong, palpable physical reactions. to stuff that's not even happening, and we'll torture ourselves. We create these prisons for our brain and for our body, for our consciousness. We create these prisons for ourselves and we trap ourselves in it. And we start to think that, like, I need to figure these problems out. I need to get a better understanding of this. But it's just thoughts. Like, it's just stuff that's going through our brain and is torturing us and is creating a very physical reality of stress for us. So life surrounds us with storms, right? Again, there's the outer stuff. There's the external storms of, like, this happens to me. I lose my job, or, got problems in a relationship, got problems with my friends. I've got money problems. I get sick. I get hurt. Somebody hits me with their car, whatever. Like, stuff does happen to us 100%. But life surrounds us with storms, and we also create a very stormy environment within ourselves, a very unspiritual environment for ourselves. So what Christ is doing in this is teaching us to elevate ourselves above us, right? He's teaching us that we can still, like, in the midst of the storm, we can find a place of calmness and a place of peace inside of that, because he comes walking through the storm. He doesn't settle the storm first. There is another story where he tells the winds and the waves to chill out, and it's like he puts it to rest. And that's a different story. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like he's demonstrating that, yes, he has power over nature, but he also has power over the internal nature, over the emotional state, over the mental state, over all that stuff. And in this case, though, he's saying, like, you don't need to have all of that stuff, like, go away. You don't need the external world to calm down. You don't even necessarily need your thoughts to stop. You need to find the place of peace and stillness inside of you. And that's what he's teaching here. And as you do this, you learn to transcend all of the chaos. You learn to get past the reaction side of things, to where you're not responding in a negative fashion to the thoughts that arise. You're not responding and becoming identified with the emotional reactions and feeling as though this is me. I have to be this state. I have to be fearful. I have to be angry. I have to be whatever. You're learning to transcend. Okay. So I'm going to quote, I know it's not biblical, but I'm going to quote Joseph Campbell here. He says that the difference between the mystical experience and the psychological crack up is that the one who cracks up is drowning in the same water in which the mystic swims. So play off of that. You are the ship in this sense. I always, growing up, they always told me, like, oh, the ship is your comfort zone and the life outside is the storms. You got to get out of your comfort zone. And there's value in that. I think that there's a real that's worth saying. But I think that the deeper meaning is that, like, this is you. Like, you are the storm. Like, you are the one that's creating this chaos, maybe unconsciously, maybe inadvertently, but this is what's going on inside your head, inside your body a lot of times. People do things to you. It's like you can't necessarily control what they do to you, but you do need to take responsibility for the emotional storm that arises as in response to that. So if somebody says something to you that hurts your feelings and you start to get angry, you start to get hurt, you start to feel some type of way about it, like, yes, they did that thing to you, but you're responsible for maintaining your inner peace, for maintaining your sense of stability, for maintaining your spiritual awareness, for understanding that I'm not going to react to that, right? You don't get to choose what happens to you, but you do get to choose how you respond to it. You do get to choose if you want to allow these waves to knock you over and to capsize your boat, quote unquote, or if you want to be the type of person that learns to gracefully walk in water in this case. So you are the ship, the waves are the thoughts in the mind, the emotional storms that come up. And Jesus is the symbol of truth that calmly walks about within every storm, undisturbed by the chaos. The world's going to try to throw a lot at us, but truth can't be overthrown. The peace, the stillness, that spiritual value, that can't be overthrown. It can't be shaken. It can be obscured. We can lose sight of it. We can look away from it. When the disciples jump out of the boat and walk on water briefly, and then they turn and they get fixated on the waves, they get fixated on the stuff, on the chaos, on the illusions, they start to sink. And that's the same, that's exactly, it's a perfect metaphor. Like, that's what happens to us. Like, if we find that sense of stillness, we find that sense of, like, presence of communion with the divine, a lot of times we'll hold on to it for a minute, and then we turn our attention back to our emotional reactions. We start to get caught up in the same old stuff that we used to. And so we start to sink again. It doesn't mean that Jesus left. Doesn't mean that he wasn't there anymore. It just means that they took their attention off of him and they weren't able to transcend anymore. So he is that higher truth. He is that divine presence that is keeping us elevated, and that will keep us on the keeps us from being weighed down by the material stuff that causes us to sink in the first place. Um, and you got to remember too that the waters, the winds, and everything, these are illusions, right? Like when he calms the storm, when he walks through the water in general, like he's demonstrating the power over nature. Like this is God's world. Like he created it, he can control it, he can do whatever. You don't need to worry about that stuff. The idea that these things can hurt you is just an illusion. It can't hurt you unless God allows it to hurt you. And that's true for the physical stuff. It's true for the emotional stuff too, right? The thoughts that you have in your head, the emotional reactions that you have to those thoughts, I should say, they're not real. Like it's all in your head, not to be that person, but like it is all in your head. And to be fair, your head has a lot of power to it, and it's very big and it's very expansive, and it contains a lot of interesting things, but it is in your head. So if you are creating a situation where, for example, you're thinking about something tomorrow at work, you're thinking of financial struggles, you're thinking of this person that wronged me 2 years ago, whatever, and you're physically reacting to it, you're having these emotional responses, like you are torturing yourself. You're creating something like, yes, maybe it happened to you at some point, but it's not still happening to you. If you're thinking about something that's happening, going to happen in the future, it might happen in the future, and you're getting stressed out about it, like you're torturing yourself, you're suffering before you have to suffer, right? Like maybe it does happen, but it's not happening to you right now. So why are you putting yourself through it? Because that's how our brain's wired. It's really difficult to break out of that. And it's one thing to point it out and to say it. It's another thing to start walking the spiritual path and actually getting into that close connection with God, to where we start to learn that we're not those thoughts, we're not those reactions, and that more so that those things are not even real. They're just illusions. They're just phantoms. They're wraiths. They are, the stuff that you see shadows at night when you're getting up to go to the bathroom or whatever. It's like, is there something lurking in the corner as you're trying to go, walk down the hallway in the middle of the night? Probably not, like more than likely, but it's in your head and it feels real, right? It feels like there's something there, and we torture ourselves with it, and we still have that overwhelming, at least I do, have that overwhelming sense of fear. It's like, oh, something's getting me, right? But we walk through life like that, like, oh man, this is going to happen, and then it doesn't happen. It's like, okay, well, this is going to happen. It doesn't happen. This did happen, however long ago. It's not happening now. So these things are distractions. They're reflections. But when we walk in faith, that chaos is not able to disturb us, because we let go of it. We rise above it. We release everything that would weigh us down and cause us to sink. All right. Faith brings the stillness in the storm. If you cannot learn to bring stillness into your state of being and master your emotions, you're not going to be able to keep your eyes on the truth. And so I think that that's a very important thing to point out here. When, who was it? Peter? I probably should have researched it. Probably should have written this down. I think it was Peter that jumped out. When he took his eyes off of Jesus, he started to sink, right? And everybody says, well, when you forget about God and you start focusing on the world, you do the same thing, you start to sink. And that's true. I would also argue and add in here that it's not about, I'm just going to look at God when things are going badly. I'm going to make a routine. I'm going to make a practice where I make it a point to, throughout the day, sit in stillness. I'm a huge advocate of meditation, because if you don't put aside time to sit down and find that stillness and practice it when things are not going crazy, I promise you, you're not going to find it when things go crazy. And then you're also trying to be still, right? If you can't do it sitting alone in your room, if you can't take 20 minutes to sit down and be present in whatever way that you want to do mindfulness meditation, you know, you're finding a way to bring all of your attention to Christ, to let that fill your entire perception, to fill your entire essence for 20 minutes when nothing else is going on. Do you think that when things go crazy and it gets really tough and there's a lot of other stuff happening to you, do you think that it's going to be easier or harder then? Like, obviously, it's going to be harder then. If you don't practice this, if you don't make it a point to do it on a daily basis, and then to take it off the meditation mat and actually into the world, it's it's going to be hard, right? Like we have those moments of grace where God does reach out and say, "Hey, listen, like just keep your eyes on me," for sure, right? But He's not going to force us to do anything. We have to make that decision. And if we're too fixated on the waves and on the storm or on the winds to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, Jesus, forgot about you," Like if we if we don't make that decision to do that, he's not going to force us to, right? He may reach out sometimes and say, "Hey, they forgot about me," but 9 times out of 10, like we have to make the choice that we're going to walk that spiritual path. We have to make the decision that we're going to bring our attention to faith, to truth, and to stay in alignment with all that. All right. Um, if you don't do that, the sea, the storm, it's going to overwhelm you. There's no way around it. So, so Christ demonstrates the highest development of the soul. He has total mastery over the elements, over the air, over the water. He has total mastery over himself. So calming the storm externally is cool, but you can't do that unless you can calm the internal storms. Christ was human, just like, well, Jesus was human, just like us. So he still had to deal with the same emotions. He still had to deal with the same nonsense that comes up, and just, all the fun stuff that comes with being a person. But he had complete control over that. It did not control him. He still struggled with it, but he was a master of it. He did not allow the thoughts to kick up the waves. He did not allow the emotional stuff to overwhelm him. He did not allow fear to overwhelm him, or any other, anger, greed, pride, lust, anything. He did not allow that to control him. Doesn't mean that he didn't deal with those waves, but he did not allow it to develop into storms. And so that is what we are striving for. And obviously he was perfect and we're not. We're probably not going to get to that point. It's an admirable goal, and it's the goal that we should have. But he is our role model for that. It's not about just believe in Jesus and like you're good. It's like, yeah, it's like that is important, but try to be like him. And what does that mean? It's like try to develop yourself to the fullest extent that's possible, to become that archetypal spirit of goodness, of truth, that essence of stillness that allows divinity to shine into the world through us. Like that's the goal, and it's, we need help to get there. He didn't, but it is the goal. If we're not taking that sense of that purpose out into the world with us and into our personal lives, we're missing the point here. It's not about just, well, I go to church and I believe this thing. It's like our lives need to be transformed, and God will work on us. He will change our hearts for us. Yes, but we have to make the decision to put ourselves on that path. We have to say, okay, I'm willing to start walking in this direction. Then you get the help, right? You get told what the direction is. You get the strength to do it. You get the advice to keep you on track. But you have to walk. You have to make the choice that you're going to move down this road. Okay. So where did I go? Let's also remember that the in Genesis it talks about the face of God hovering over the waters. So when the waters, i.e., the emotional body, is still and calm, it reflects the face of God. It's a beautiful thing. It can't be the same. It's not the same radiance as God, but it can reflect the essence of God, right? When we allow ourselves to become calm and still, we also reflect that higher truth, that higher nature, and we reflect it out into the world around us. It's a very beautiful thing. But when the waves are choppy, when the water is disturbed, when we're emotionally out of control, it doesn't reflect anything. It's just chaos. It's just muddy and murky. Um, so our efforts, and if forcing that down, saying I'm going to just not feel this anymore, that doesn't work either. If you ever try to like stop a wave by putting your hand in it, it just makes more chaos. It just disturbs the water even more. It's just disruptive. So the key here is to focus on Christ, because when Peter jumped out and kept his eye, or yeah, kept his eye on Jesus, everything was fine. It wasn't his power saying, I'm going to force the waves to conform to me and to hold me up. It was that focus on truth. It was that focus on Christ consciousness, on that energy. So turning our attention away from that and towards the stuff, that's the issue, right? Turning towards him lets us find that stillness in the midst of the chaos. And again, we don't need the chaos necessarily to just stop and disappear. We need to learn to be still in the midst of it. And what good do miracles do if you don't understand how they apply to your life, right? It's not about just believing that this happened. Like, yes, it's very cool, it's interesting, but it's about applying the patterns and the hidden teachings behind them into your own life. It's about meditating on these things. It's about making it a part of it, or excuse me, making it a part of your life. You take these stories and you take them out into your life, and you remember this is the like stories speak to us, right? If Jesus had just said, to gain this mastery over yourself, it probably, like it wouldn't have resonated the same. Whereas we have a story that is meaningful and we can like play with it, with exactly what I'm doing right now. Its essence, it does something to us. It gets into our unconscious, it gets into our brains, it gets into our soul, and we start to experience life in context of that story, right? Because now that's a frame of reference of like, this is what could happen, and here's like the dangers that we face, right? Like we have to go and confront these emotional storms. We have to go out onto the lake. Jesus said, he didn't say, well, one day something's going to happen to you and you should be able to deal with it when that happens. He said, no, go out on the lake now. Like we're going to deal with this now. I'm going to put you in the situation. Like you have to confront this part of life. You have to go do it now. You have to make that decision that I'm going to face up to the emotional storms within me. The next time you get stuck in traffic and you I love people who are like so calm and composed until they get in traffic. So somebody cuts them off. It's like, no, that's an opportunity. Like, why are you having this like really toxic emotional response? That's honestly like bad for your body. It's bad for your brain. It's bad for your experience of life. But we'll allow that anger, that frustration, that sense of helplessness to go. Like we let that like destroy us a little bit, right? It's like, oh no, it's fine. It's like I get out of the car and it's gone. It's like, no, it's really not. Like it becomes a habit. It becomes a way that we express ourselves throughout life in general. Excuse me. Okay, so sending the disciples to wait in meditation while he sends the crowds away. Again, those who follow the letter of the law, but not the spirit. Those who listen but don't hear. That's the crowds that he's sending away. And the crowds in this context are the people that hear this story and say, "Oh wow, that's cool. Jesus can walk on water." Like that's the letter of the law, or not the law necessarily, but that's the external stuff. That's the outside of the cup, not the inside. That's the, oh, that was interesting. Now I'm going to go back to life and nothing changes, right? So he's sending away all of those people. He's saying, you have been called to walk a higher spiritual path. You have been called to actually embody this teaching. And so you have to go out there and you have to go through the process. And it's a dark process. Like the storm is an example, is the metaphor for a reason. Like it's painful, it's scary, it's overwhelming, it's uncomfortable, right? But it's necessary, because that if we don't get control over it, if we don't learn mastery of the elements on an internal level, we're going to constantly have these storms raging inside of us, right? And the goal is like the kingdom of God is within you. It's like, but it's the seed that has to grow. It's the seed that has to take root and to find the good soil inside of you to to become what it needs to, right? It's there, but you have to explore it. You have to give it the nutrients. You have to give it the care that it and the nurturing that it needs to grow. And if you are only looking at the stories, at the teachings from an external level, and then not changing anything, you don't take this into your life and actually do something with it, then you're not giving it good soil. You're just kind of holding on to it loosely from an external and saying like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, that's good, I'm saved, but you're not allowing your life to be transformed. And that's the real purpose here. um, these are the people that listen and don't hear. The disciples, on the other hand, of course, they go out into the wilderness, they go out into nature, and they wait on the Lord, right? And remember that the miracle only happens for them. Like Jesus didn't do this miracle for all of the people that were listening, for the crowds. He didn't let them witness that. It was only for those disciples, for the ones that were willing to confront their inner chaos, their inner storms. Fix this. Okay. So, all right. The strong winds, like we said, that's the logical, rational mind. The storm is the emotional. Um, so it's difficult not to get caught up in this stuff. Obviously, I'm going to skip over this part. Just remember that within this chaos, within these storms, within all this nonsense that happens, the spirit within us remains still. We have to tune into that. We have to look for that, right? That's all it is. Otherwise, if you're reading the Bible and saying like these are good stories, that's analogous to in the Tao Te Ching, what they talk about how like it's the finger pointing at the moon. It's like if you point at the moon and somebody looks at your finger, it's like you're missing the point. Like I'm trying to draw your attention to the moon and you're looking at my finger. And it's like the Bible is like that too. It's like if you just say, "Oh, Jesus walked on water," it's like no, that's pointing to that's pointing to something deeper. That's pointing. You're looking at the finger and saying, "Oh, that's really cool," and it is cool. Fingers are cool too. Like it's kind of they're intricate things. And it's like, how did they develop? We have no idea. That's cool. Very, very awesome design that took place. But it's not the point. The point is that there is a deeper spiritual truth that can help revolutionize our lives, and we're missing it if we fixate on the stuff, the external thing. And unfortunately, that's what's taught. So 2 Corinthians 3:17 through 18. Um, so all of us who have had the veil removed can see and reflect the glory of God, the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like him as we are changed into his glorious image. So I picked this because it kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. The illusion of the storms, of the thoughts, of the emotions, of the dangers, quote unquote. Again, it's illusions. It's a veil over our eyes that makes us think that we are in danger, that makes us think that something bad can happen to us, that something can hurt us. And the reality is that nothing can hurt our soul. You know, fear not man who can hurt the body, fear God who can hurt the soul or cast the soul into hell. Like that's the real, like we need to not be worried about like, well, this could happen to me. It's like, no. What is God telling you to do? What is God saying to do? What is the presence of God bringing into your life? Um, and once you start to kind of peel back the illusions of how you think things should be, you can start to see the deeper truths. So again, to see and reflect the glory of the Lord. Once those emotional waters are calm and still, we can start to reflect that essence of God back out into the world, which is the whole point of this. If we're not transformed, then I mean, were we really like what happened, right? Did anything actually happen? And that spirit that the Lord, who is the Spirit who makes us more and more like him as we are changed, that spirit is resonating with the spirit inside of us. That is, we have to find that inner stillness, that inner place of peace, so that we can connect directly to God. And we're not listening to the voices in our head. We're not listening to the, like, I got this gut feeling. It's like, no, that's your body, though, right? That's not spirit. You have to learn to distinguish between what you want to have happen, what makes sense to you, what logically makes sense, what emotionally makes sense. You have to learn to distinguish between the mind, the body, and the spirit. It's very important. And again, I think that you need this practice for it. You need to sit in meditation. You need to sit and think about nothing but Christ for however long, and then take that out into the world and actually go around with that same energy, with that same mentality and everything. That veil is the illusion covering our eyes to the truth. It's the focusing on the letter of the law again, rather than walking down the path of transformation to which it points. Remember, because the disciples were perfectly safe the whole time. The danger was just an illusion. In Mark 4:40, after that, he says to them, no, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Like the danger, and he's kind of pointing out, it's like, why are you scared of the storm? Like there's nothing that can harm you, right? Like if anything does harm you, like that was God's will. It can't harm your spirit though. And so the spirit is what's walking on the water here. The spirit is what is transcending all this. And that's what you need to tap into, or tune into rather. And then we're going to shift out of this just a little bit to kind of illustrate a point. Isaiah 45:3. And I will give you treasures hidden in the darkness, secret riches. I will do this so that you will know that I am the Lord. I love this verse. I love this. So the secret riches are of a spiritual nature. We often wonder why we have to go through challenging times, but that's where the spiritual treasures are hidden, right? That's where we find the keys to elevating and transforming ourselves to become more like Christ. If we didn't go through the darkness, if we didn't suffer, we would be content with the stuff of the world, right? If we didn't suffer a little bit, we'd be like, this isn't so bad. Like I can do this. I can hang. It's kind of nice. Like this is a little fun here and there. When we go through the trials and tribulations, when we go through the suffering, when we go through the bad stuff, that makes us realize like, this isn't it. Right? Like the material is not the end all be all. We have to become dissatisfied with that. Not in the sense that we hate life, not in the sense that we don't respect life, that we don't respect our bodies, that we don't respect, the amazing creation that we live in. It's not to look around and say, this is all evil, it's all terrible. No, that's not the point. And that drives me crazy when people say that, like, I hate my body because it's just flesh and it's weak. No, that's not the point. Like, God made your body. It's beautiful, it's amazing. This life is beautiful and amazing, but it is material. It's beautiful and amazing for what it is, but it's not the highest aspiration. It's not the end all be all. It's a very low level of creation. There's much more out there on much just much more out there. But if we don't go through the darkness, if we don't suffer, we would be content with this world, right? We would not care to strive for more because we would just love the physical. So suffering is therefore a gift. It's something that reminds us that what we perceive as good is just a cheap substitute for the eternal bliss of unity with the divine. So these things are hidden in darkness, as Isaiah says, because it's at those low moments when we're finally willing to give up control and surrender to God. In those moments of weakness, his strength is displayed all the better, right? 2 Corinthians 12:9. He says that my power works better in weakness. Because if we are strong and we do something, we can kind of boast, we can kind of brag, like, oh, I did that, God help me. Versus it's like, there is no way I could do that by myself. There's no way I could do that. And that's our human weakness, and God's power moves into us and gets the job done. That's a better display of his strength because it's obvious that, like, it wasn't us, right? So going through these dark periods where we don't know which way is up, we don't know where we're at, or even which direction we're heading in. We don't know the dangers that are around us. We don't understand what we're going through. Like, that's when God really can lead us, because that's when we give up and we're like, I don't know what's going on. I do need you, right? When things are going great and we're like, yeah, I got this figured out. This is easy. I know what's going on. We kind of don't turn to God as much a lot of times. And we should, obviously, but it's when we come to that understanding of, like, I don't know. I can't do this, right? Like, the storms are too much. Like, I can't walk on water. I can't deal with the overwhelming crap that is bearing down on me, right? That's when God can move in, because it's when we allow him to, typically. We need to get to that point of surrender and trust, because then we're able to rise above the chaos of this world and within ourselves and walk on the water, so long as we stay focused on God, because then we find stillness, we find peace, and we find presence. Remember too that Christ came walking to them on water and at the night in nighttime when it was darkest. He didn't come to them in the day when everything was like nice and easy. Like, he could have just walked across the water, like, whoa, that's crazy, that's awesome. What are you doing? How do you do that? He did this when they were the most afraid, and he came with this sense of peace and calmness. Like, why are you scared? Don't worry about this. And how do we find this peace? So, for one, we have to be willing to go on the journey, right? We have to be willing to travel through the darkness. We have to be willing to get on the ship and go off into the storm. But remember, we're not doing this by ourselves. God's going to do the heavy lifting if we just allow him, if we trust him. We're going to go, we need to go where we're led. We need to confront the monsters along the way. So just before that, in Isaiah 45:2, I'm going to back up just a little bit. He says, I will smash down gates of bronze and I will cut through bars of iron. So the bronze in this verse symbolizes the fortification, the wealth, the material stuff, the crudeness of the physical world, the stuff that we can perceive of as being wealth, I guess. The base essence of what this life is. It's the physical stuff that we see. And it seems to us that it's impenetrable, right? Because bronze, a gate of bronze is kind of like tough to break through. But it's not an obstacle to God, right? And it's not just like, oh, like if you are fighting somebody who has very heavy fortifications. No, 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 no. It's the fortifications within us. It's the defenses that are around our hearts, around our minds. It's the fears that keep us from living with our hearts open. It's the desires that distract us and pull us into the waves. It's the pain, the trauma, the confusion that closes us off to the spirit, the rulers of this world that trick and distract us with material wealth and physical fear. So the bars of iron, on the other hand, represent the judgment that traps us within our own condemnation, really. In Daniel 2:40, he says that iron smashes and crushes everything that it strikes. And that's the judgment from which we're saved. It's the judgment of God. Yes, it's the judgment of the law of cause and effect. We do bad things. We're bad people. Not in essence, but like we make a lot of mistakes, and we're saved from the consequences of that. Right? We're saved in a spiritual sense from the consequences of living a base physical life. Right? Like we are redeemed, and we're allowed to transcend this material reality. We're allowed to get out of this. We're allowed to be freed from this trap, right? But it's also the judgment that we create for ourselves, right? And there's probably two different directions I can go with this. I want to focus on this one though, because we judge ourselves a lot. In the Garden of Eden, when they ate from the fruit, they became self-conscious. God didn't say immediately, "Oh yeah, you messed up. I knew you were going to do that. Get out." They hid from God. They covered themselves. They no longer felt worthy to stand in the presence of God. And we do this all the time by our own judgment. We know that we did something wrong. We don't feel worthy of love. We don't feel worthy of connection. We don't feel like we deserve to get good things. We feel like something bad's got to happen. We feel afraid that something's going to happen. Um, we internalize failure as like a moral weakness. We internalize the stuff that happens to us as kids as like, this is who I am. This is going to direct me. This is just, the way life is. And we judge ourselves that like, I'm only able to do this much. I'm not worthy of love because my ex didn't love me, or because my parents didn't love me, or I'm not worthy of success because it didn't happen for me, or because this other person had an easier time. And we judge ourselves, and we create these prisons in our own mind, um, the prisons of judgment. And that's what God says. He's cutting through these gates of bronze and the bars of iron. They're nothing to him. He can smash through all of these things. Um, by living in sin, what we're doing is that we're separating ourselves from God. All the sin is the things that take us away from the true path that we're supposed to be on. Um, it's not God condemning us because we screwed up, but rather we have free will, and choosing to further and further bind ourselves to the flesh and the material world, it brings judgment on us, right? Like it's a world of cause and effect. If we choose to get sucked into the physical stuff, if we choose to fixate on the storms and on the waves, there's consequences. Like it's cause and effect. What's happening here is that God saves us from that, right? If we turn to Him, if we allow Him to. Doesn't mean that we're never going to have to deal with the weight of our mistakes. It just means that He's going to intervene. He's going to intercede for us, right? He's going to protect us. He's going to help us. He's going to save us from this, right? Um, when you start saying like, I hate myself, I hate my job, I wish I was better, I want this, I want that, I'm scared of such and such, I miss her, I want him, why am I not good enough? Maybe if I do this, people will love me. I need XYZ to be happy, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the bars that God cuts through and frees us from. It's not about the material conquest. It's not about like, I'm gonna go conquer this city. I'm gonna go capture this foreign peoples. It's about the spiritual freedom. It's about the internal fortifications the barriers that we put up that create separation between ourselves and God, because we don't feel worthy of this love. We don't feel worthy of communing with the divine. And so that's the stuff that He's breaking through. And out of this darkness, we can reemerge protected when we remember. Also, we talked about this recently, that the city doesn't need the sun or the moon to give it light. Revelations 21:23. The glory of God illuminates the city from within, and the city is us, right? Like we don't need the external stuff. We don't need the world to shine its light into us. We don't need things to be good. We don't need to have this job. We don't need to have this relationship. We don't need to have this financial situation. We don't need to have this political situation. We don't need to have any of this stuff. It's not the external stuff. It's the light that comes from within us, right? It's the light of God that comes from that space of stillness inside of us. That same light that is, walking on water, and gives us peace. It gives us turmoil it gives us peace from the turmoil of this world, from the mental and emotional storms that are raging inside of us, right? So turn your attention to Christ and become the calm in the storm. Meditate on the peace of the Lord and on the power that comes from His stillness. And then, to quote Ephesians 5:14, awake, O sleeper, rise from the dead, Christ will give you light. Because we live in this state of deadness, of illusion, of blindness, of ignorance. But we don't have to stay that way. So when we seek God, we can't do it in our own strength. We learn to sit. We learn to not say anything. We learn to not do anything, just to listen, just to sit, just to wait and to keep watch while we allow God to work on us. Again, it's that meditation on Christ. And we will often find that peace and then turn back to the world, right? Because we get distracted by something. We get scared about something or whatever. We get sucked into the emotions, to the thoughts. We get distracted. We fall. And at first, Peter, he was fine, but then he not only became afraid, but he also forgot how it was that he was able to walk on water in the first place. Because that's what happens when you get distracted. You forgot, like, you may have things go well for you and like you're taking care of, you're protecting, like you're transcending, like, it's awesome. And then you start to focus on something and you get scared and you forget, like, what was it that made me able to do this in the first place? It's not my own power. It's not because I've, chosen to be a better person. It's like I have help. Like, and that's super important, right? But remember that even when Peter sank, Jesus reached down and saved him. So we don't have to be perfect. We're not going to be, and he knows that. So we're going to fail. We're going to screw up here and there. We're going to falter. But if we're generally on the right path, if we're generally following him, right, like he's going to help us. He's going to reach down and pull us back up, right? We don't have to do it all on our own. He's going to teach us. He's going to save us. He's going to pull us out of the water and the confusion. And there, the ego says that all this stuff is dangerous. It says, no, like I need all this, whatever. But the kingdom of God, like I said, is within you, right? It's Christ walking on the water. It's Christ quieting the storms, conquering them too. So if you just put your focus on that spirit, you'll be good. So, all right. Thank you guys for listening and good luck. We'll see you next week.